Nice to meet you as well.
Awesome. It looks like it's one of our first times having all of you here. Katie, we have had Revolution here before, but I'm excited to have all of your different opinions and perspectives coming from all different parts of the industry and your different experiences. Sweet. So it looks like we have about 15 seconds before we get started. So any other questions for then?
Let's roll. Let's do it.
Awesome. Let's do it. I am excited. Morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the second day of the virtual North Central College Sport Business Conference 2021. I'm looking forward to this panel we have here today is the Game of Numbers, and I am joined here by Kyle Milenovich. He's the social media coordinator of Marquee Sports Network. He's also a North Central alum, proud alum of 16 and 19. Also have Katie Kester. She's the senior supervisor media services for Revolution. Also joined by us is AJ Stoner, Director of Analytics and Business Intelligence at Forefront, and Adam Grossman, founder of Black 6 Analytics. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. If you guys want to go through and introduce yourselves, I did read off your positions, but if you want to go through and give a little bit about yourself, kind of where you came from and what you do in your organization now.
Sure.
And we'll start with Katie.
Okay, I was going to say I can go ahead and kick it off. I'm Katie Kester. As Jordan said, I work at Revolution. It's a small sports marketing agency. I work on their media team, so I do everything from strategy to reporting on TV, search, social, programmatic, you name it, kind of running the gambit of all different channels. A little bit about me. So I'm from Lamont, Illinois, so I'm a neighbor of North Central, but I currently live in Denver, and I'm super happy to be here.
Awesome. How about you, Kyle?
So I'm Kyle Milenovich. Like Jordan said, I'm a North Central alum, graduated undergrad with majors in sports management and marketing in 2016, and then a master's with an emphasis in marketing in 2019 from Lamont as well. I'm trying to think. Worked at North Central, actually. I worked in the alumni office for 3.5 years, ran the NC alumni social media before moving to MLB, and then now with Marquee and more in the content creation side, but I definitely work with analytics as well.
And about you, AJ?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is AJ Stoner. I work with Forefront. We're a sports marketing agency based in Chicago, and I've been in Chicago about 5 years. Before joining the company, previous stops kind of working on the team side. So worked for the Miami Dolphins in their sponsorship department. Worked for the Rays in their finance department doing ticketing-oriented analytics, and originally from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and did my undergrad and master's at the University of South Florida there. So excited to be here and talk analytics this morning.
Awesome. Thank you. Adam?
Hi, everyone. I'm the CEO and founder of Black 6 Analytics, a sports sponsorship technology analytics company. AJ and I have worked together in our capacities as Black 6 and Forefront. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but good to see you and good to see everybody on the panel. Black 6 Analytics, as I mentioned at its core, is a sponsorship technology and analytics company. We use machine learning, particularly computer vision and natural language processing, in addition to algorithms, models, insight generation, to really understand the value of sponsorship, which we'll talk about obviously in more detail in the panel. I'm also a professor at Northwestern's Masters of Sports Administration, where I teach 2 classes. One is called Research Methods and Quantitative Analysis, and the other is called Entrepreneurship in Sports. I'm also a co-author of the book, The Sports Strategist, which was featured at the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference a few years ago, and then author in several chapters in other books as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Fantastic that you and AJ know each other, as well as Katie and Kyle are both from the same area. So it is always great to see how our paths will reconnect, especially in this industry. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you guys. Hopping into our first question for today is, how would you define analytics to someone who does not know much about the topic? Okay, first, let's go with Adam.
Yeah, actually, it's a good question, and a question we answered directly in the book. We actually do put a specific definition on analytics, but essentially, analytics, if you're talking about mathematical modeling in general, essentially it is, how do numbers represent reality, right? How do you take numbers and create a representation of what's actually going on in the world? And I think if you can break it down, analytics, or even some of the stuff I talked about with machine learning, there's a lot of complicated concepts, but at the end of the day, you really, thanks, Jason. For saying the book is good. I'll let my co-authors know, in addition to my wife. But the main thing from an analytics perspective, right? And again, mathematical modeling generally is, models are called models for a reason, right? They're supposed to represent and understand what's going on in the world and in reality. And if you can translate analytics into something that really does, understand and describes reality, whether you're talking about it from a descriptive perspective, which is, what's happening right now, or from a predictive perspective, what's going on in the future. That's really the focus of analytics.
Awesome. Thank you. AJ?
Yeah, I'd love to build onto what Adam shared. Speaking from the perspective of having an analytics role within the industry or for a team, that it also defines kind of how you kind of a three-step process that I like to think about, of how you aggregate your aggregating data, right? Finding the data that you have and bringing it together. How you manipulate it, whether it's through the use of models, through programming languages that some of us are more acutely attuned to. And then what Adam really harvested on, of how do you, condense and consolidate those into kind of actionable insights and key findings that you then present to leadership to take action, and hopefully, find a way to drive revenue as a result of it. So I think what's really interesting to think about from an aggregating standpoint is the idea that, sports properties across the landscape, whether you're, if you're a Big 4, Big 5 sports team, if you're, a college athletics department, if you're a nonprofit, an NGO, right? If you're like USA Wrestling or something like that, there's very different levels of the data that's available to different sports properties' fingertips. And so, if you work for a more prominent organization, they probably have the data already, and they just need more power in manipulating it and analyzing it. If you work for a property that's a little bit lighter on revenue, maybe behind the bell curve from an analytics perspective, you're going to need to be more resourceful in figuring out ways to aggregate that data first before you can even get to analyzing it. So I think that's what I'd add on to that when we think about analytics. Of the manipulation is a core component in building models and understanding programming languages, but how you aggregate that data and how you get it to a place where it can be manipulated, and how you kind of boil it down into actionable takeaways is important too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for building off of what Adam had presented to us. Really interesting to think about how industries can utilize the data and how we are using it to create revenue. I know that's certainly what a lot of organizations are looking for now. I'm certainly excited to see how Kyle and Katie can contribute to this as well, looking at from more of a creative marketing standpoint, but also what they have to offer about just the general definition of it.
Sure. I can have.
Oh, Katie, please go ahead.
Sure.
Apologize.
Go ahead, Katie. Kind of how I would describe analytics to someone who doesn't know much. It's really building off of what Adam and AJ said. It's just, how do you compile and interpret that data from multiple data sources, whether it's your sales data, campaign performance, syndicated research, anything like that. But how do you really turn that, or like compile those and really turn that into actual actionable insights that you can make informed decisions on? So from a media perspective, when we're looking at analytics, it's always either the present or the future. So are we looking to boost current campaign performance? Or are we looking to inform future strategies? So looking into the future of what would we do differently? What worked really well that we'll continue to do? So turning those things into ways that you can really boost your brand and continue to be successful and move forward with emerging technologies. So kind of just building off what they had already said, but Kyle, take it away.
Yeah, I would agree with what you were saying. And at Marquee, we use it to, guide decision making in a way. Definitely use it heavily when talking with sponsors and on the sales side to see what's performing well, what's not. A lot of sponsors want to see high numbers on their posts, so we have to figure out ways, to get the highest engagement. A way that we've actually been using numbers lately is simply with the formatting of our posts, whether like with character limits, and whether like for Twitter, for example, if our first tweet or if the first line of our tweet goes into the second line, like kind of the formatting aspect of that, and whether the tweet, if it's a video, photos, the number of photos, simple stuff like that. I know it seems very mundane and everything, but we're noticing that when we have 1x1, so square videos with open captions, those videos are performing way better. So we're going to attach sponsors to those, obviously for revenue sakes, but just little things like that. We use analytics heavily.
Definitely awesome. And you mentioned a lot about sponsorship, and I know AJ's company, what they do over at Forefront works highly with sponsorship. Do you want to, whoever would like to take this question, elaborate on sponsorships and data analytics?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can. Oh, go ahead, AJ. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's, there's I think what I was speaking to a little bit earlier of, different levels of data that teams have available at their fingertips. I think what's interesting this applies to sponsorship, but it applies elsewhere as well. The need to kind of crawl before you walk and walk before you run too. So where Adam's company really excels is finding organizations and helping them really run faster, right, and sprint. If you're starting at the ground level, how do you kind of get there? And one thing that we've looked at with a lot of our partners, something Kyle kind of touched on a bit, which is how does sponsored content perform relative to non-sponsored content, and expectations that a lot of properties have of, if our following is 1 million people and our average post gets 100,000 impressions, that if we sell a sponsored post, that they're going to get 100,000 impressions. But what's interesting that I'm sure Katie could speak to is how smart companies like Facebook are, that if you try to promote another brand without pushing paid media behind it, even if it is really good content, it's going to struggle to obtain the same reach and impressions and engagement as your organic content that isn't branded or sponsored message. So that's always a fascinating component that we like to think about, and and some of that can be analyzed pretty simply through extracting post data and looking at it in Excel, right? And then it's where do you go from there, and how do you integrate more intricate levers of value like logo recognition and things that Adam can speak to in great detail, and more of those core components of value.
Yeah, and oh, go ahead.
Adam would just ask if you want to contribute to that.
Yeah, I think that, like, per AJ's point, I mean, I don't know why I keep plugging the stuff that I'm writing, but if we're playing a drinking game, I guess now's the next time to take a drink, because I did write a chapter on sponsorship valuation as well in a book called Sports Business Analytics. So again, if you're interested, that's something you can just read. But I actually want to go to AJ's point, because I think obviously, like I've said, I mentioned a lot of buzzwords when it comes to sponsorship valuation, particularly stuff that my company does using like machine learning, neural networks, natural language processing. That is definitely something we do, and I'm happy to talk about that in detail, which I have also done directly for a Forefront. But I think the top line is, it goes back to what Kyle and Katie were saying. It's like, what do you actually want from the sponsorship? How is value being created? Fundamentally, when we're talking about numbers and data and sponsorship, we're talking about, posts, campaigns, in-venue activations, media, experiential marketing, IP analysis, corporate hospitality. Ultimately, it's really, how does this drive value for a business? And to AJ's point, if you're talking, and to Kyle's point about social media, right? What social media content, one of the key things that you're looking at from how does this drive value to my business, is how does this help my business generate lifts in core brand metrics. Typically, core brand metrics are things like brand engagement, brand perception, brand awareness. And how can you use content, and how can you leverage data, communicate that to senior decision makers, whether you're talking about the property or you're talking about the sponsor, and how do you communicate that the content you're creating is delivering that value? And Kyle brings up a good point, which is a version of what's very common or more common in the space, particularly when it comes to content creation, is a form of what's called A/B testing, right? Let's test out different pieces of content. Let's understand the value that's being generated. AJ brings up a good point. Does paid content work better than organic content? And typically we find similar that organic content is definitely by far the thing that drives the most value. But if you have the data, you have the analytics, and you have the insights around that data, our company also layers in. We have, when I've talked about natural language processing, it's really understanding the sentiment of the posts. So can you look at what's called owned and earned content? So owned content is content that comes directly from a company like Marquee Sports Network or the Cubs. Or if you're talking about earned content, what are people more generally in the universe talking about? And when you're talking about social media, you want to talk about, particularly when you're talking about brand perception, it is what are people who are talking about that particular property, event, athlete, what are they talking about when the content comes up, and what is their reaction to it? And we have a system that essentially teaches the machine how to read and tells us from a negative 100 to a positive 100 score, what is the sentiment of that? And the point there is just to say, we're not just saying this is how you should use a square photo or a rectangular photo. We're not saying you should do organic or paid just based off our experience alone. Here's, to AJ's point, what he said earlier, here's how the data has been collected. Here's what the data is seeing through the models that we've created. Here's the insights that's coming from that. So leveraging data and, leveraging data to facilitate communication, particularly between people, and leveraging data, technology, analytics. That's really important when you're trying to understand value. So there's a lot of complicated things that go into it, but that's really at its core when you're talking about sponsorship, is how is value being created and why is it being created? And then how do you communicate that to everybody involved?
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was very insightful into exactly how we're using data, especially in this world of social media, and especially in this world of COVID, where social media is driving businesses right now. So it was really insightful from all of you. Thank you for commenting on how we're using data and leveraging it to improve performance, which leads into our next question is, besides improving performance, what do you see as the most beneficial aspect of using analytics to influence decision-making? And I'm going to start with Katie for this question.
Yeah, great question. I think the best part of analytics outside of performance is knowing your consumer and knowing their path to purchase. So with campaign performance data and everything, and syndicated research, you can really make some awesome educated inferences about who your audience is, what content they're consuming. You can just glean so many insights, and then you can really, once you get down into that, figure out their path to purchase. So what does their purchase cycle look like? How long does it take, depending on your product category, for this consumer to go from being aware of you to then finally making the conversion and making a purchase. So I think that's super valuable when it comes to analytics, is you can really turn that data into insights about who your target audience is. And you might learn something about, you might think that your target was this way, but when you're pulling the insights, or the data, it's something completely different. So that kind of opens doors into knowing who your current audience is, and then showing where your opportunities lie into new target audiences. Right.
Awesome. And you're talking about, taking the data that you learned about your consumers and kind of making a profile for them, essentially.
Exactly.
And understanding how, who your ideal kind of consumer looks like. So what does that look like for you guys over at the Cubs, Kyle?
Yeah. And Katie was saying, what's the path to, for a purchaser, I believe you were saying, or path to purchase. It's kind of the same for us, but it's more towards path to engagement and path to eyeballs, because ultimately our goal at Marquee is, it's twofold. We want people to watch our network. That's where our big revenue comes from. But obviously you engage with our content. And recently we just launched a new paid media campaign where we worked with an outside vendor to, find who our target audience is and who our average viewer is both on linear and on social. And, we created a media campaign that was somewhat tailored toward that, but then we created a second one that was tailored to create or to engage fans and viewers that aren't exactly within that target audience. So it does help guide decision making, and we're using it to see who our target is and how we can bring in more. I'm sure you guys have heard of the 80-20 rule. You want to keep bringing in the same. easiest to bring in the same customer, but we also are trying to expand our reach.
I think Kyle brings up, I just want to build on one thing Kyle was saying. Integrated marketing campaigns, which I know all the people on the panel are familiar with. That's really important, right? How do you work across multiple channels, and how do all the channels work together to drive consumption? And Kyle's points is an excellent one, right? They want to use social media to drive, linear media or streaming media consumption, and how those all work together is an increasingly important part of, understanding analytics, understanding data, and seeing how all this works together from an audience perspective. Consumption and engagement is really important as you're looking at understanding how value is being created across partnerships, but also across multiple different revenue streams in sports.
And I'll say one thing at least for Marquee right now. I mean, obviously we're a new network. A big problem that we're facing right now is that our network isn't widely available in Chicago. And so there's still a lot of negative sentiment around Marquee. We're available on Comcast, DirecTV, but we're not available on any streaming services. So if you go to any of our posts and you just look at the comments, there's a ton of people who are a lot of negative feedback. And it's nothing to do with the content that we're posting, but it's a lot to do with they can't watch the Cubs games. And obviously there's Cubs fans everywhere. So it's another aspect that we have to take in, whether we're getting negative comments, but it might not be negative comments on the content that we're creating. So, I mean, you have to filter through those analytics and see, okay, it'll come up as a negative comment, but is it a negative comment because of what we're creating, or is it a negative comment for something else?
But certainly, I believe Marquee is taking all that information and kind of filtering it towards finding opportunities for your organization as well.
Yeah, definitely, we are.
AJ, would you like to comment on that question as well?
Yeah, the only thing
going back talking about. Go ahead.
The only thing
I apologize. Go ahead.
Kind of sends across the across whether we're talking about sponsorship or from the ticket side or from the player ops side, just speaking about analytics more at a macro level. I think the big the big opportunity is really like that. What's that race to real time look like? So I think in the digital world, if you're thinking about social or you're thinking about campaign performance and what Kyle and Katie focus on, what's beautiful about that space is the data is very quickly at your fingertips. You have that when you get an updated impression, that updates, you have access to that almost virtually in real time as it happens. What's interesting is thinking about where there's opportunity to take things that we need to analyze as sports organizations, again, whether it's the player ops side, whether it's ticket sales, whether it's sponsorship from an on-site activation where people sign up, right, like physically at an on-site location, and creating a process where we can kind of funnel those things together and make them increasingly closer to real time. So across different mediums and different dynamics, specifically like on-site dynamics, it's more of a race to figure out how do we create a process where we can get that data flowing into something in our back-end data storage or what have you, and be able to digest that and include that in real time for recommendations to leadership.
And we're discussing how using all that back-end information is going to help you make those better predictions that we were talking about earlier, and looking forward towards kind of the future and creating opportunities for your organizations. So the next question I have for you all is, studies indicate there will be an exponential growth in analytics industries over the next 5 years. What do you think will be the largest contributors to that growth? Adam, would you like to pick that one up first?
Yeah, sure. I think it's part of what AJ just said too, is that the explosion, and I think even Larry just made a comment about this in terms of data velocity and data volume. Data is coming in faster, there's more of it. And the idea is that, and this is actually something that's become to the forefront a little bit or more because of what's happening in the world generally with the coronavirus, right? There's a big emphasis on data, and we should follow the science and data-driven decision making. Data in and of itself doesn't necessarily tell you anything, right? You need people to take the data, analyze the data, and analyze the data at speed and scale. And with the explosion of technology, particularly in the sports world, whether that's more recently with things like blockchain technology and these, digital collectibles, which people may have seen in the news, NBA Top Shot being the most common example of basically moments in games that become unique moments with unique identifiers that are traded on blockchain exchanges, the explosion of social media content that Kyle was talking about particularly, and what AJ was talking about as well. Katie's talking about it in terms of consumer insights. There's all these, from an audience perspective, and again, I'm not sure exactly what Revolution's using, but we have our own, Katie was mentioning syndicated research. So there's all these ability to, typically from a syndicated perspective, when you're talking about audience information, there's versions of survey data, and surveys can be put into play much more quickly and much more efficiently given the explosion of survey technology. There's also, from our perspective, we also look at social media conversation. There's new social media platforms. So the explosion of technology, the explosion of, and AJ mentioned this in terms of leveraging programming and programming languages and different, we primarily focus on Python at my company, but there's Python, there's R, there's all these different new programming languages that are coming out. So it's an explosion of all these different, an explosion of information will cause for an explosion for need to understand that information. And it doesn't seem like the explosion of information will stop anytime soon, particularly given some of the things that have happened to the sports industry given COVID. Kai was talking about this, I think, a little bit before, but clearly, like, the consumption of sports has changed during COVID because people can't go to the events. That has caused for some digital and technological advancements that have a lot of data associated with it. And that includes both things from a consumption perspective, but also from an athlete performance perspective and from fan engagement perspective. So in general, the thesis is right. Explosion of technology, explosion of the amount of information will require the need for more insights, information, analysis, and being able to communicate that to shareholders quickly and efficiently. And that's where analytics can really come into play.
Right. And so obviously the theme of our conference is we're talking about the future of sports and looking at the future of analytics specifically with this panel. And you emphasize this explosion and how quickly we are able to collect data. Do you believe that we are almost at a point where we're collecting it quicker than we can analyze it? And so what do you think is the future of analyzing and implementing it into our consumer interactions and how you bring in people to sports games and events?
Yeah, I think it's, and again, I'm happy for the panel obviously to contribute as well, but data collection, and again, actually goes right back to what Larry was saying and what you were saying, Jordan, is, yeah, I mean, velocity and volume is increasing so fast that there is going to be an issue where, is there going to be too much data? That's certainly something to think about, but I actually don't think it's the case. Actually, typically the harder part of analytics is actually not necessarily building the models. You can build models and build programs, and while those take time maybe to build out the initial construction of it, one of the nice things about it is once you have a model or an infrastructure or programming language knowledge in place, it does facilitate the actual analysis piece of it. So from a data science perspective, actually Kyle mentioned the 80-20 rule. Data scientists would say it's probably like a 90-10 rule, where 90% of the issue is the data velocity and volume, and 10% of it is actually the analysis component of it. So if you think of that, it probably isn't going to be necessarily as difficult on the analysis side, particularly as machine learning grows and some of the things that I've talked about, whether it's natural language processing or computer vision technologies, particularly in this space. Machines are very good at processing information extremely quickly. Machines don't get tired, machines don't get bored, machines don't, except for, as far as I know, one time at Facebook, don't develop their own language or talk to each other directly. So like machines, that is what they are really good at, is processing information and processing information quickly. So if you're able to build programs, build models, build infrastructure that can process the information, that I think will be a concern, but not as big a concern as we actually have to collect this data. We have to get the data ready to be processed. We have to get the data ready to be analyzed, and we have to get the data ready to be put into the capabilities and resources that we have. And then I do think a larger problem, actually, beyond just data collection, is also communication, which I think is, again, something we've highlighted, is how do you actually communicate all that information to people who don't have a quantitative background or people who need to make decisions? If we're using this to drive decisions, people really have to understand what's going on. So explosion of new data means new things that people have to consider and new things that you have to think about when communicating the information.
Fantastic. Thank you. Katie, I'm curious to see how you are processing all of the new income data and the growth of this industry over at Revolution.
Sure. Yeah. So Adam kind of got me thinking when he was talking about that explosion you had said. And I think you kind of also have to credit marketers here too, where we have this explosion of data, but we're also agile and we have that appetite to really get that information. And we want to continue to evolve with it. So as Adam had said, I mean, there's so much information coming at us, but to think about all the obstacles of consumer privacy that we've overcome, like the CCPA and other privacy settings coming out, but our appetite to get that data and analyze it without sacrificing that consumer privacy, you kind of have to also credit, these minds that you're thinking of that are really being agile and flexible and being able to take that complexity of the data and analyze it. And going back to Adam talking about syndicated research platforms, we use platforms like GfK MRI or YouGov, where YouGov is every week they have a new survey. So it's very up to date, very new, and they include current events as well. So, it's kind of marrying all these different platforms, the syndicated research, the campaign performance, et cetera, everything. And I think that kind of just speaks to how marketers are always trying to find different ways to quantify things, and how can we really analyze those into those decision-making insights. So that really just kind of bounced off of what Adam was saying, but a couple thoughts that I had based on that.
Thank you. AJ.
I think from a property side, and again, referring to sports teams and entities, in terms of jobs, I think there's still a significant disparity of the amount of bandwidth of analytics staff that a sports property will have that focuses on the ticket sales side of things versus the sponsorship side of things. And something that, thinking about where the opportunity is to grow, I think there's a lot more there. I think most of us are familiar with analytics becoming a buzzword as a result of the player ops side of things really getting invested into that, especially in baseball. I think there's incremental growth there, but I think a lot of larger teams have picked up on the need for analyzing things from the player ops side. But from the business side of things, there's from my experience and the clients that we've worked with, there's a heavy focus on the business side of analytics, on ticket sales, on marketing, merch sales, concession sales, but it's very, very light, if at all, on the sponsorship analytics side of things. And I think that's partially due to the nature of sponsorship as more opaque than ticket sales is in terms of easily being able to quantify and trace revenue from an investment. So it's a fascinating space, but that's where I see a lot of opportunity for analytics from a jobs perspective in the future.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm glad you brought up the point of looking at player performance and running back to analytics in that context. And I'm sure what Kyle does with Marquee Sports Network, kind of your success of your business is highly regarded for how well players are doing, because that's what's bringing in consumers to watching your network. So what do you have to comment with for that?
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, I'm very much just echoing what Adam, AJ, and Katie have said. We're using analytics. It's a competition, right? We want to draw the most eyeballs, the most clicks, everything. It's in baseball last year on the baseball ops side, the Dodgers and the Rays were in the World Series. They're two of the most heavily analytical teams to in baseball, whether it's player development or whatever. I mean, it's very parallel to what we're doing. I mean, we have analytics. I think AJ was saying it right at our fingertips. It's just how do we use these to boost our performance, whether it's on social, digital, app, streaming, whatever the case may be. It really is. The way I view it, to be honest, it might sound dumb, but I just view it as competition. I mean, maybe it's the competitive side of me, but I want to use this as any way possible to boost ourselves and to beat the others.
Thank you. That leads us into our next question is thinking about analytics when it comes to team and player performances versus organization and business performance. How closely related are they and how do they impact one another? I'm going to start off with AJ for this one.
I'm glad I got to kick off this question because that kind of what I was thinking about dovetails with what Kyle said of the competitive nature of analytics. So if we think about separating player and business ops side, from the player ops side, it is absolute like top secret, right? You keep that data proprietary to yourself. You do not share it with other teams. Your goal is to beat them and build the best model. From a business side, I think it depends on where you are in the industry, but tends to be more collaborative. If you can help another team generate more revenue because you have an inside scoop on how much a capital investment generated in new ticket sales or in sponsorship revenue, if the league overall makes more money, if teams overall make more money, their franchise values go up and they're worth more. So there tends to be a little bit more collaboration on the business side. In terms of how they're related and how they're different, I'd say that obviously the process is the same, right? You need to aggregate the data that comes in. You need to analyze it and manipulate it the right way and condense it into those actionable takeaways. So the process is consistent in my mind, and kind of the interconnectedness of the two. There's not much of any collaboration between the business side of an analytics team and focusing on ticket sales sponsorship and the player ops side. Those are pretty siloed. But obviously, if you have a robust analytics team on the business side of things that helps drive more revenue, in theory, that means that your payroll will go up for the player ops side, and that'll influence the decision making that a player ops analytics team might make on whether a free agent's worth X investment versus, if you try and call up your best prospects instead. So they can be interrelated, but on a day-to-day basis, they tend to be pretty separated from each other, broadly speaking.
Katie.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like AJ hit it from that aspect. I also thought a bit of it from an agency side and how on my side, like a team, the media team versus the organization as a whole. I kind of thought of it that way, and in a different way from a sports organization. I think that they're very interconnected. Because if the teams and players are given the tools they're needed by the organization, tools, training, adequate salary, then your teams are going to be uplifted. Morale is going to be high. Efficiency and performance is going to skyrocket. So in that way, I think businesses versus a sports organization are different in that way. But I think that AJ's perspective was super interesting and something that I hadn't really thought of how kind of siloed those different pieces of the sports business are, and kind of really gets my wheels turning there. So that was a really cool point, AJ.
Kyle, do you have, I know leading into that question, we were kind of piggybacking off of an idea that AJ brought up. So then I want to pose the same question to you about looking at the difference between player performance and organization business performance.
Yeah, I want to touch a little bit on the player performance. So with my job with MLB and the Orioles, and then this past year or so with the Cubs, I've been around, obviously capturing content, but been around a lot of players and kind of behind the scenes stuff. And it is very much what AJ was saying, how teams, they're very analytical, but there's no sharing secrets or sharing data about anything. And even the way they're going about capturing their data and analyzing it. With the Orioles, they're definitely more, I'll say, hitting focus, while the Cubs their big thing right now is their pitching lab. And I know that's kind of more baseball in depth, but at least on the player performance standpoint, I mean, just the way teams these days are using analytics, and even in the most minute way. I mean, I don't know if you guys have Moneyball. That seems to be just the overall term for baseball analytics. But seriously, there's any way they can find the slightest edge, they're using it.
Adam, do you have anything to contribute?
So basically, when it comes, so we have our company's developed something called an influencer analysis platform, which actually does look at on-field and off-field considerations. I did a post and an email recently, literally, I guess yesterday, about the NBA and analyzing NBA player performance, both from an on-court and off-court perspective. when it comes to player performance, teams from a purely business perspective are usually pretty inefficient when it comes to analyzing performance. Teams generally want to focus on a player's actual or perceived on-field performance. But purely from a business perspective, if you're talking about revenue generation, a player's off-field performance is both more consistent and more likely to be, and also often can drive more value to an organization than a player's on-field or on-court performance. So we see that in the post I did yesterday about the NBA. LeBron James, while he is one of the most valuable players on the court in the NBA, his value to the Lakers off the court in terms of his star power generates far more value to an organization. And so the real big takeaway is that AJ's exactly right, Kyle's exactly right. Teams are very proprietary when it comes to on-field analytics. The reality is at a basic level, you can pretty much, and my company has used regression analysis to determine most of or many of the key factors that drive performance. Increasingly, as Kyle was saying, and AJ was saying, teams are really focused on increasingly narrow spaces where they can gain competitive advantages. And the ultimate benefit of that may be, while it could be substantial, it ultimately could be relatively minor from a purely business perspective. And if we're talking about business, particularly in the context of maximizing revenue generation, understanding of players, and some of the stuff that Katie was talking about as well, understanding the players, and even Kyle, understanding the players as influencers, and particularly, we talked about the explosion of data and the explosion of the importance of data. Data has really shown that players, particularly from a sponsorship perspective, can be as least, if not more valuable to the teams in terms of driving social media content, driving fan engagement, and driving digital content impressions. So factoring in those things into the analysis is really important. And then to AJ's point about from a sponsorship perspective, that's one of the things that, when he's talking about potentially inefficiencies from a sponsorship and sponsorship analytics perspective, actually leveraging the players themselves as opposed to just the teams is something that we really try to focus on to say, can we look at organic content? Can the players, it's not always possible to do this, but how can you leverage players? How can you leverage players to talk about the things that they're interested organically, or how can you proactively find the players and the teams that are organically talking about things that are important? So the reason I'm bringing all this up is we had a model that's folded into our core model. It goes to what Kyle was talking about from a Moneyball perspective. The key metric when you're talking about on-field performance from a Moneyball perspective is a metric called wins above replacement, which is essentially how does a player perform as compared to a replacement level player. We developed a model called revenue above replacement, which is essentially how does a player perform from a revenue perspective as compared to a replacement level player, and what is the value that player generates to the organization. The reason I'm bringing all this up is obviously, clearly I have a point of view on this topic, but two, it goes to AJ's point about, like, if you're looking to get, one of the reasons we created this whole approach is to differentiate ourselves in the sports industry, and creating differentiation in ways that drive value is really critical, particularly for people who are looking to get into or progress in the sports industry. And you can say, look, we need to define how we're using analytics. We need to define what analytics is for and how it's driving value for the organization. One way we want to do that is we can, as analytics, have an impact on player performance, yes, in terms of on-field Moneyball or traditional Moneyball issues, but we also want to say, we want to go to players and say, we do look at you as part of the business. We do look at you, and we want to try to eliminate those silos as much as possible that AJ talked about. So if you can say, here's the data, here's the information, here's how you can help the organization really drive value, and to Kyle's point, actually make them competitive about the issues that are important to their business, because what's good for them as individual players is good for the team as a whole. That brings us all together and potentially creates ways to unify the organization using analytics and bring the business and team operations sides together. It's actually funny, in the book, my book, we talked about this specific issue in depth in terms of the separation between the team and business operations side. And one of the teams that actually had tried to really break down those barriers is the Cubs, particularly with Theo Epstein when he was there. And I think Jed's probably still too. I mean, Kyle probably obviously knows way more about this than I do, but they were really made that a critical priority, was to say, we shouldn't have the business and team operations because it's better for the entire organization when they work together, and that we know what's happening on as much as possible on the brand and marketing side, so that we can, help that whenever possible, as we're considering all these factors in terms of how we maximize the value of the organization. So anyway, like I said, obviously I can I've already gone on way too long about this, but I can go on and on.
No,
about
absolutely
this.
not.
But sorry, I'll stop there.
Awesome. No, thank you so much. You guys all provide so many different perspectives into how we utilize analytics in organizations, and looking at it as a marketer standpoint, as Katie talks about, looking at networking and broadcasting from Kyle, and then looking at sponsorships and valuations from AJ and Adam, and how we collect data. But essentially, you guys are all using it to make a better experience for the consumer. So thank you guys all so much for all of your perspectives there. And we are going to head over to the Q&A section from our viewers today. And our first question is, and I'm going to direct this one towards Katie first. Curious to know if anyone is working in international markets and how that differs from here in the US, either how data is collected or the appetite sport decisions makers have this type of data. So kind of looking at the difference between as anything varies in data internationally than here does here in the US.
Sure. So I am not currently working in international markets, but we're starting to dip into that. Revolution does have a UK office now. So we're looking into how we can, work better with that team. And part of that is getting data resources that we can, get out insights outside of the US, because in the past we only looked up US data, where now we're moving into, like I had mentioned before, we're looking into a platform called YouGov that is a syndicated research platform similar to the Simmons and MRIs of the world, but we're able to have those live outside of the US as well. So we're really trying to integrate those into our work, but I'd probably have a better answer for you on that in a couple months. So I think I'll digress to the other panelists to see if there's any international experience here.
Awesome. We'll have to connect with you in a few months. I'm sorry, where Revolution is going with that. So is there anyone else who wants to comment on kind of international markets and sports?
Yeah, I actually want to point that Katie brought up is about data privacy. I mean, data privacy is a big issue, and there's certainly different data privacy laws, particularly in Europe. Is something and some of that's coming to the United States. You mentioned YouGov, which is obviously a great, and some of the other which are great platforms for survey work. One of the things that we want to use, and I think Kyle and AJ have talked about this as well. When you're talking about understanding social media conversation, you want to look at what people are saying, but there's obviously privacy issues, and there's obviously if you're talking, and Katie was talking about audience information. Well, there's a lot of information and a lot of things from a data privacy perspective that you have to think about. And again, understanding from an international perspective that their focus on data privacy is one thing to consider. The other thing is just from an international perspective, we talk about data collection. Obviously, different international markets have different sports, they have different businesses, they have different cultural practices. So while the approaches to understanding it, the actual content itself really does differ across the different geographies, and and this is very obvious, but obviously there's different languages in different international markets, and that just also presents its own challenges in terms of how things, different languages, different customs, different cultures, that presents its own challenges. But at the end of the day, what we found when we're doing our international work is it is consistent. It goes back to what are the outputs, what are people looking for, and how are they using this data to drive decision making. And typically that's how and why from a partnership perspective is how and why is value being created for our business, or how and why is value being created from our content or from our activations, or and how do I communicate that effectively in whatever language and whatever custom. That's really critical.
Thank you. So the next question that we have, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to. So we've done some work for clients in Australia and New Zealand, and a lot of conversations internationally. Like, what's interesting from a data standpoint is a lot of data sources are like limited to the U.S. So trying to find a data source to aggregate from other continents is difficult. And then what's been discussed on data privacy, I 100% agree with. I think the big nut everyone wants to crack is China is the largest country in the world by population, the second largest economy, and we're familiar with how popular they are with the NBA. Trying to aggregate data from China is extremely difficult because they're a communist country, because they have an internet firewall. So trying to understand those fans, engage those fans, is an extremely difficult, if not impossible, task for most organizations at this point in time. So that's a really interesting thing to think about too, is that kind of the big puzzle that needs to be cracked from an analytics standpoint.
Awesome, thank you. The last question we do have from our viewers today is, are you both data miners and data analysts? Perhaps describing the flow of data in your organization. This question is for anyone who wants to answer.
Yeah, I don't know if that was for myself and AJ, or if that was for the whole panel, but essentially both. My focus is more on data analysis, but obviously you need to be able, to our point about data collection, you need to understand how and why to collect data, and how you get the data and how you can get that information. Like I said, our company specifically leverages, whether we work with data partners that help us get the information or mine the information, but it's definitely something where you want a combination of different mining and analysis as part of it. The flow of data, within my organization, it typically comes from, which is, I think, probably similar. It sounds like similar to the other panelists, but it comes from, as we've talked about, it comes from multiple sources. So from us, whether that's talking about doing, when I've talked about computer logo exposure, which is, looking at games from a linear television perspective, a digital perspective, looking at social media content, and looking at videos, images, photos, text, getting all that information requires us working with multiple data partners, working with our clients, working with publicly available sources of information, and aggregating that all together in a way that we can then analyze it. So I think, to Larry, to your question, it's, typically you have some version of both at an organization. You don't necessarily need to be an expert at both in order to be successful at the organization, but you will have, definitely, as AJ was saying, you need to collect data, or collect or aggregate data, analyze the data, and then communicate that data in a way that people can understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, one of the difficulties of working in an agency setting is, if you're trying to drive business solutions for your clients or your partners, depending on the partner, some of them have that information at their fingertips and are readily willing to share it. Others expect you to just go do it for them. And so trying to find that delicate balance can be a little bit tricky. You want to get, the fight is always, you want to get as much as you can directly from your client, your partner, and then fill in the gaps where you need to, aggregate data separately from that. So a lot of what we do is working with partners to find that data, to aggregate it, and then of course share it with us, so that we can have that data directly coming from them. Is always going to be a better source of information than trying to go through and scrape it separately, especially considering a lot of the data that you would need to do an appropriate analysis, whatever it is something that really only the property or the team is going to have the actuals of that information at their fingertips. So that's a little bit of a balance of if you work on the agency side.
And I'll kind of hop off of what AJ just said about, and what Larry's comment about data being imperfect. I mean, it is super valuable to have that first party data from your clients. They know better than anyone else who their target is. So, and you can make your inferences based on your campaign performance and your syndicated resources. But as Larry said, that's probably going to be imperfect. And it's interesting though, as we've said, the complexity of all this data and how do you marry it and see how it matches, see how it differs. So I think that's an interesting point, as AJ had said, is just having that from your client and from the brand is awesome to have, but then it's also, how does that marry up with the data that you've pulled and analyzed yourself? And how does that match up? And then how does it differ so that you can, as we had talked about before, open doors into new target audiences and new tactics that you can employ? So kind of going back to that 80-20, 90-10 rule of, making sure that your data is matching that consumer, but then you're also finding new avenues to reach them.
Yeah, and I'll say, I guess my experience might be a little different. So I'm more on the content creation side, where I'm creating content, I'm covering the team, I'm watching the press conferences, I'm editing stuff. But I do work daily with the analytics side for what's working, whether it's again on social or on the site. I think the biggest thing from my standpoint is very much open communication with the analytics side, taking their opinions, just and any questions that they have, and kind of using the information that they have and applying it and going from there. It's a lot. It really is a lot of it's like yes and check, and I guess in a sense, but open communication is very, very important.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. That was our final question for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your valuable experience and your opinions with us. We were happy to have you. Have a great day. Up next for our next panel will be Reimagining the Digital Space, and that starts in just a few minutes at 11 a.m. And we hope to see you all there.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for having
Thank you.
us.
Have a great day,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.